The governor's administration, the State Water Resources Control Board, has proposed regulations to implement these new requirements related to water use efficiency, that the state's urban retail water suppliers will be responsible for complying with these new requirements. There are about 405 urban water suppliers that serve about 95% of the state's population. So these are really the water suppliers providing most of us the water that we use every day. Some of the ways that the State Water Board is proposing to implement these requirements could create quite a bit of additional work for water suppliers and could increase costs for suppliers in a way that would likely be passed on to residents and businesses in the state. Because the laws and the regulations do not mandate anything or require anything of the individual person, it's not like an individual resident has to actually do anything. However, water suppliers will very much be trying to encourage residents to make types of behavioral change that will help use water more efficiently. So what do I mean by that? For example, your water supplier may offer a rebate if you replace your inefficient shower head in the shower or replace an inefficient toilet. They may even offer rebates if you were to convert your lawn to a more drought-tolerant landscape. So we expect, and in talking to water suppliers, this is what they've said to us as well, that they'll be really trying to promote those types of programs and those types of actions by consumers. There will also be benefits to implementing this framework in terms of, if you use less water, you're paying for less water. If a supplier is delivering less water, they don't have to produce as much water. But in the near term, as they try to implement these new regulations over the next decade or so, there will be pretty significant costs associated with that. And those costs come from paying for the rebates and incentive programs that I described. It'll also come from having to increase their staffing in order to comply with these requirements. And then as water suppliers sell less water, that means less revenue coming in. And again, that will be partially offset by the fact that they have to produce and supply less water for their customers, but it won't affect sort of the fixed costs that those suppliers still have. Those fixed costs will stay the same. So all this is to say that as a consumer, as a customer of your water supplier, you may see rate increases in your water bill. Over the 2025 to 2040 period, they estimate that costs for water suppliers, wastewater management agencies, and residential customers will amount to about $13.5 billion over that period. But they estimate that the benefits, on the other hand, would result in $16 billion. So they estimate that the benefits would outweigh the costs over that period. Another independent assessment was done that found sort of the opposite, that the costs would outweigh the benefits. We don't have an exact number for what this would mean for an individual residential customer, for example, and that will highly depend on which water supplier provides their water. Some water suppliers are in a really good position going into these new requirements. For example, they may already have robust conservation programs in place. They may have a lot of recycled water that they use. They may have, a lot of their customers may have already done some of these conversions, and they may not have to reduce their water by much. On the other hand, if you live in an area where a lot of reductions will be required, that type of resident may see a steeper increase in their water bill. So the way that it's designed is that each individual supplier will be developing a water use budget. What it is it's an amount of water in gallons that the water supplier would have delivered to its customers in the previous year if water was used efficiently. So that means supplier A is allowed a certain amount of water for what their customers use indoors, their residential customers. They're allowed a certain amount of water for what their residential customers use outdoors. They're allowed a certain amount for what commercial customers use outdoors. And then they're allowed a certain amount for some water ends up getting lost through system leakages and that sort of thing, like problems with the infrastructure. So a certain amount is allowed for that. So you total up all those uses. If all of that was being done in an efficient way, you total those up and you end up with the water use objective in gallons. Then each individual supplier will also have to report how much water they actually used. And then the amount of water that they actually used will be assessed against that objective. And at some point, starting in 2027, the water supplier could be penalized by the state if the amount of water that they actually use exceeds the amount in their water use objective. What this will mean in terms of actual water reductions. So the state water board released some estimates of how much they estimate the different suppliers around the state would have to reduce water use in order to meet the objectives by 2035. And 2035 is really the date by which all of the final standards are fully phased in. So, for example, over the next 11 years, some of these standards for efficient water use will be phased in, and they'll slowly sort of ratchet down to try to get us to more efficient water use. So 2035 is sort of the date that the final standards will be in place. Looking at the State Water Board data, we estimate that state water use would have to be reduced by about 14% statewide. This, of course, varies pretty drastically when you look at different suppliers all around the state. And just as a general rule, it looks like the suppliers in inland areas of the state will face larger reductions than suppliers in coastal regions. It's not so much that we find the framework to be unrealistic or the goals of conservation to be unrealistic. Where we found some potential challenges has to do with some of the very specific ways in which the Water Board proposes to implement these new requirements. So let me just give you an example. Let's say somebody develops a new multifamily housing project and they've got a landscaped area around this housing development. Current law requires that landscape be developed in a water efficient way. So they can't just put whatever grass and use a ton of water to maintain this landscape. It has to be done in a way that's efficient according to a particular standard. This is the standard that the Water Board has chosen to apply to all existing residential outdoor landscapes starting in 2035. The challenge, though, in talking to a number of different people is that some of these newly constructed landscapes that use that standard, those landscapes sometimes don't ultimately end up performing at the level for which they were designed. And what do I mean by that? Basically, you could design a landscape that's drought tolerant, very water resistant, but if the person taking care of that landscape doesn't maintain it properly, or let's say waters at the wrong time, or overwaters, or the new owner plants a bunch of new trees or other types of vegetation that take a lot of water, that landscape is no longer as efficient as it was designed for. And so there's a lot of factors that go into how a landscape is maintained and how sort of water efficient it is in the long run. So what the Water Board is proposing is that sort of same design standard for all residential lawns. And we have some concerns that it might not exactly be realistic to assume that every residence in the state would be able to sort of redesign their landscapes and then maintain them at that water efficient standard. One reason that we raise some of these concerns is that because suppliers will likely have to increase their rates in order to comply with the new requirements, some of their customers who are already low income may have less room to adapt than higher income customers. So to give you an example, if a lower income customer is already limiting their water use as sort of a cost savings measure, they may have less ability to reduce their water use to compensate for the higher rate that is being charged by their water supplier. Somebody who's higher income by comparison, they may not worry so much about how much water they use right now. So they may be able to say, oh, we could cut back here and there and reduce our water, and that would kind of offset the increase in their bill. Another way that this could play out is it's a little bit harder for lower income customers to take advantage of the rebates and incentives that water suppliers offer to them. Say, for example, your water supplier offers a rebate for converting your lawn to a more drought tolerant landscape. Typically, these are provided as reimbursements after the fact. So you as the customer have to pay for the full cost of the project up front and then apply for the reimbursement. And the reimbursement typically doesn't cover the full cost of the project. So as you can likely see, this could be hard for a lower income customer to pay those upfront costs, or to pay the differential between the rebate amount and the total project cost. Our office works for the state legislature. We're a nonpartisan, independent policy and fiscal advisor to the state legislature. So as we reviewed these requirements for the legislature, one of the things we noticed was that there was no direction about what the state should do with the potential water savings. So in a drought year, the reduced demand among customers, because they're conserving water better, will simply make it easier to maybe get through the drought, because the reduced demand is better aligned with the more limited supply of water. But in wet years, these conservation practices could end up actually resulting in excess water that hasn't been used. And we think the legislature might want to start thinking about how to track and manage that water to really maximize the benefits of this new conservation framework. So for example, if the state were able to save that water either through groundwater banking or other methods for use during dry years, that could really help increase the state's drought resilience.
If you haven't checked out CaliforniaInsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now, because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California, so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to CaliforniaInsider.com and we'll see you there.